Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. And today is a book club episode. We have two guests on today, Cameron Klossing and Gregory Parker Jr. And they're going to be talking about two different books, both published by Hendrickson Publishers. They're both about Herman Bovink, and one is on the Guidebook for Instruction in the Christian Religion. The other one is titled, What is Christianity? So we'll jump into that conversation, talk about both those books with both these gentlemen here in a moment. But first, as a reminder, as always, on our show notes, some links. So one of them is to Hendrickson Publishers. Hit that link, find these two books. You might as well just buy both of them at the same time. Why not? And then you can find out some more information about Gregory and Cameron. And then you can also find a link to find a local Reformed church near you. That is, you hit the link, you type in your zip code, you'll find the closest Reformed church near your area. And there is, on that note, there is a new church this year. At some point, there will be the Santa Ana Reformed Church by Peter Bell. And so that will be in Santa Ana, California, in Orange County. So check out more information about that. You can email Peter about that, find out more information, how to meet up and learn more about that church. And then there is a link to the Society of Reformed Podcasters. So that is a group that we are a part of. There's other podcasts out there that are Reformed in doctrine, so you might enjoy those as well. There's also some information to become a bridge builder. That's what we call our supportive group of listeners that donate financially to us. And so you can find out information on how to do that. And then I guess we will jump into this episode. If I didn't forget anything else, let Peter further introduce Gregory Parker Jr. and Cameron Klossing.
Yep. So we got, depends on how you say his last name. I guess he's got a family debate on how you say his last name. It's either we'll say Klossing for the rest of the episode. He's a PhD from University of Edinburgh under an advisor we've had him before, James Eglinton. He's a lecturer in applied theology and missional engagement at Christ College, Sydney. And it's also a pleasure to have Dr. Gregory Parker, who is a professor at Cairn University in Pennsylvania. We've also had a couple other people from Cairn on this podcast as well. So thanks for coming on, talking about all things Bavinck, but especially these two books.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
so as we talk about this stuff, we'll kind of broaden out our reach first and then kind of get closer into this. So if you don't mind kind of going back and saying maybe a little bit about yourself, and especially so how you got into Bavinck studies, how you got into translation work, what led you to these two books. I know you guys have done a couple other books besides this as well. So what kind of got you to this point? What got you interested in Bavinck, all that stuff?
I guess I'll go first. Greg is signaling at me. So. The funny part is that I'm in a different spot on my computer screen, so it seems like he was actually signaling at Nick.
That's what I thought too.
I guess I'll
start. He was pointing, you went to Nick. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take this one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my journey toward PhD, but my experience in Bavinck starts probably while I was in seminary. At Reformed Theological Seminary, and being introduced to Bavinck through my systematic theology class, where I'm trying to think. I think that Reformed Dogmatics was just coming out, but we were still reading Hendrickson's old one volume, The Doctrine of God, which was my initial experience in the Bavinck world. And as I was getting ready for ordination in the Presbyterian Church in America, my committee just really spoke highly of Bavinck. I had been reading him a little bit, but hadn't really gotten into him a lot, and they encouraged me to read more. So I did, and then ended up looking at talking to Scott Swain, who was my master's thesis supervisor. Who said to me, hey, if you're interested in doing a PhD, you should go to Edinburgh and work with James Eglinton and do something on Bavinck. and I took his advice.
Is he good at Bavinck? I don't know anything about him.
Scott knows a lot of Bavinck. It's not his area of expertise, but I mean, as with all Reformed theologians these days, that's what Scott
who's this
needs.
Eglinton guy? How is he associated with Bavinck?
Eglinton, I have no idea. That guy, whether or not he actually ever reads Bavinck is the question. Perhaps the better question is, does he read anything but Bavinck?
Right.
He's now venturing into another. He's now venturing into another Bavinck, not Herman anymore. So
further into the Bavinck sphere.
Exactly.
And if you guys don't know this, there is a episode we did quite a while ago that he on
a little over a year ago on that biography.
On Bavinck biography. Yep.
So I ended up at Edinburgh. Never intended to go into academia. Had always intended to end up back in the pastorate, and it was the reason why I started studying Bavinck. To be completely honest. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and he seemed like a good bridge that if I wanted to be a pastor, he would only help my pastorate. And if I wanted to be a scholar, he would only help my scholarship. So really jumped into him and have never looked back. He'll be a traveling companion, I think, for the rest of my life.
I love it. Yeah.
And was that same question towards Greg?
No, we don't care about
interest.
Craig's trying to avoid the question. This is great.
I know, he didn't say. I was like,
So I got into Bavinck, I guess, right after my undergrad. I was working in a church plant and also working in Amazon warehouse full time, and trying to supplement. Yeah, it's crazy. Trying to supplement my theological education with some strong Reformed theology, having gone to a school that was kind of dispensational leaning at the time.
Okay.
There was this little Reformed bookstore down the street from me, Cumberland Valley Bible Bookstore. And so across, I think, 4 paychecks, I went in and picked up each one of the volumes and started kind of reading it in conjunction with some of the preaching I was doing to try to bolster my understanding of theology. And then in the midst of that, felt like if I wanted to be a pastor, I needed to go to seminary. And so I went off to Gordon Conwell. And at Gordon Conwell, I was reading Millard Erickson and complaining to Patrick Smith at the time that I was getting kind of an a la carte theology, and I wanted more of like a system that would all work together and have various doctrines that would kind of impact and be talking to each other, and kind of really worrying about harmony in my theology. And so I said to Dr. Smith, "Can I read Bavinck instead of Millard Erickson?" And he said, "Sure, yeah. But when it comes to the tests, you have to be ready to answer questions about Erickson." I said, "Okay, that's fine." And so started reading Bavinck, and really it was a kind of a baptism in Irenicism. I think I was in the midst of a cage stage, or at the tail end of a cage stage Calvinism, and I didn't really know how to talk to theologians beyond the Reformed world, maybe. And so Bavinck really opened my eyes to kind of reading generously and reading with an eye towards conversation, not an eye towards destruction. And so then at seminary, this I guess Bavinck bug caught me. Started working on a paper on Bavinck's organic motif and epistemology. And I quickly found out through Grace Utanta that was his doctoral thesis.
I was about to say, it sounds a lot like what I saw from his pen.
And
I went to college with Gray.
Oh, nice.
We were the same graduating class at Biola.
Oh, that's great. Gray was very kind, helped me kind of see some of the holes in my thinking, or at least sharpen the way I was viewing some things in Bavinck's motif. And he encouraged me not to publish it, or else he'd have to respond to it, which was probably another gracious move on his end. But in that process, kind of got connected to some of the Edinburgh folk, particularly Cam. Cam and I hung out then, I think, at an ETS. And that was really when we started talking about the potential of doing translation projects together. And at that point, particularly our first project, the Sacrifice of Praise.
That's right, yeah.
And I guess before my question, I'm going to insert a brief question just to kind of pump the brakes, because a lot of our audience doesn't go to seminary school, hasn't been to seminary school, might not be Reformed, and they or maybe not even Christian. So this is a very introductory kind of question. Is before we get too deep into this conversation, people are probably wondering, whoa, did we miss, like, who is Herman Bovink? Like, who is he? Where's he from? When did he live? Just kind of a brief bio about him so we can catch everyone up in the audience to where we are with your books in this conversation.
So Herman Bovink was a Dutch Reformed thinker, theologian, ethicist, pastor, academic. I think in the podcast with James that you guys had, he really emphasizes that Bovink was a polymath, that he was kind of seeking out a way to cohesively see the whole world. But theology was the main paradigm through which he was viewing the world. And so he lived from 1854 to 1921. So really the turn of the 20th century was his main, I guess, best prime working years. He contributed a lot to kind of Reformed theology in the Netherlands, particularly, but his audience has really reached a global stage at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add just a little bit, he's one of those funny figures that because he wasn't really translated into English all that until really the 21st century, you don't get a huge amount of, you don't see his influence really in the 20th century English-speaking Reformed world. At the same time, the classic Reformed theological textbook of the 20th century was Louis Berkhof's Systematic, which, when you go and look at the back of every chapter, cites Herman Bovink.
Whole sections of it, like summarizes it, like in a sense.
Well, I'm not even going to say summarizes it. There are times where I went back and looked, and he might just be translating it. So my contention has been that lurking in the back of English-speaking Reformed theology for the entire 20th century is Herman Bovink's theology,
without even knowing it,
without us actually even knowing it. I mean, he's influential on thinkers like Cornelius Van Til out of Westminster Theological Seminary. I mean, Calvin Seminary in Michigan is incredibly influenced by him, and then places closer to where you guys are at, Fuller Seminary, find their roots really tied closely to Bavinck and Abraham Kuyper, who was Bavinck's partner in crime throughout his life. So I think that we don't realize just how much Bavinck has actually influenced English-speaking Reformed theology because of Berkhof and what Berkhof did. But yeah, so he didn't really become a big name in the English-speaking world until the 21st century. But he's, I think, since exploded onto the scene.
Very nice. So on to my next question then is, I imagine with the two titles of these two books, there's tons of volumes that are kind of either titled or going into this question, and it's a guidebook for instruction in the Christian religion, and then the other book is What is Christianity? So you kind of look at it and you're like, well, what's unique? What does this bring to the table that's different than these other books maybe out there that maybe ask the same question? How are these unique in contributions to confessionally Reformed Christianity? What are some prerequisites going into this book? Who's it for? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll let Greg talk about what is Christianity. I've read through his translation, but it's not. It's his translation, and we translated Guidebook together. But I think one of the things that's unique about Guidebook that it's kind of the book I've been searching for most of my academic career and even at my pastoral career. It is an introductory theology and an introductory Reformed theology. I mean, Bavinck wrote Reformed Dogmatics for the academic. He wrote Wonderful Works of God, which has just been republished by
Magnolia
Dei. He wrote that for the late college student, young adultish age, and he writes Guidebook actually for high schoolers. it's a wonderful introduction into the classical theology as a whole, but also the classical Reformed tradition, and helping people understand. It loses some of its polemic edge that you'll get in Wonderful Works and also in Reformed Dogmatics.
Yeah,
and it's also condensed. There isn't a huge amount of unique work in Guidebook from Magnolia Day, but what he does is he actually reworks a lot of his stuff from the Wonderful Works of God and puts it into more accessible language. So I think it's a unique volume in that I have students here at the seminary that I teach at that regularly come up to me and go, I just can't read Bavinck. Like he's too difficult.
Yeah.
Which is fair. I mean, he's
really hard to read.
Yeah, Reformed Dogmatics is not accessible to everybody. He wasn't writing an egalitarian systematic theology when he wrote that. He wrote it for a particular audience.
Yeah.
But I think that when I give my students Guidebook, they're going to end up going, oh, okay, this is much more accessible, and they're actually able to hand it to the average person in their pew.
Yeah, and the beauty of the volume, to add and then kind of segue into what is Christianity, is you can pretty much take any paragraph in Guidebook and find a section in the Reformed Dogmatics that kind of academically unfurls it further.
Okay.
And really the same with Magnolia Day. You can really just kind of trace right through all three of them and connect them. So Bavinck's kind of remarkably consistent throughout the three. What is Christianity, in my mind, is a unique contribution to kind of a theological discussion that was happening at the turn of the 20th century on the essence of Christianity. So you had all these theologians trying to figure out what's normative about Christianity. How do we talk about, you had Harnack, who was talking about kind of the corn and the husk and trying to really limit down or parsing what is this that we're talking about.
There's something true within all this stuff that we're not quite catching yet.
Right. And so Bavinck gets to kind of contribute to this discussion in what is Christianity. He was asked to contribute to this series called Great Religions. And so a bunch of different authors wrote a particular volume on the various kind of religions that were in the public sphere at the time. And Bavinck got to do the one on Christianity. So his kind of the thesis, or the main point of the work, is he's really trying to get us to ask the question, what do you make of Christ, or who is Christ? And he thinks that that's really the defining thing, or all of Christianity really orbits this question and makes something of the content of Christ.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of reading part of one work and a little bit more of the other work, especially the Guidebook too, because you guys talk about in your introduction kind of how to read this. And so if you're more like maybe more theologically inclined, you can look at the footnotes for whatever is there, and you can go further on. So how is Guidebook and how are they structured to help us kind of lead us on this path towards learning more about either classical Reformed theology or just Christianity in general?
Yeah, so I mean, Guidebook is structured Guidebook, Reformed Dogmatics, and Magnolia Day are all kind of structured in the same way. And one can start by seeing it as structured around the Apostles' Creed. So you start with God the Father, you work your way to God the Son, and then you finish with God the Holy Spirit and the Church and Christ coming again. Or you can look at it from a Romans 11 perspective, that of him, through him, and to him are all things, and it's kind of working. It's a outworking of that structure. So I mean, there's really, when it comes to Guidebook, there's really nothing unique about the structure, so much as it's Bavinck working that out for a different audience.
Yeah, and it's from your introduction. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. The Wonderful Works of God is kind of the confessional component, where it goes through some of the, like, it kind of guides you through some of the confessions, versus versus Guidebook. Not that it's not confessional, that's just not its primary purpose.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're gonna, I mean, there's a reason that Bavinck would use the Apostles' Creed primarily as his structuring his structure, and part of that is, I mean, it's something that all Christians everywhere confess. And what he's doing with Guidebook is trying to say, this is what Catholic Christianity looks like, Catholic small c, universal Christianity. This is what all Christians confess everywhere. So it's an attempt to be quite ironic and ecumenical in his work, while at the same time being confessionally reformed. I mean, he's a confessionally reformed theologian, so it's not like he doesn't see the way forward for ecumenism, or for being believing in the universal church as coming to lowest common denominator Christianity, but he's saying this is what robust Christianity looks like at an ecumenical level.
And there are at least kind of two fun threads that connect what is Christianity in Guidebook. One is kind of the Augustinian thread, which we could talk about kind of more. And then the second thread would be the second essay that's in what is Christianity, which is the Christian faith, which is a really early essay of Bavinck's, pretty much right when he comes on faculty at Kampen. And it's really this short distillation of the Apostles' Creed. And if you want to just kind of look at that, and then at Guidebook next, and Magnalia Dei, and then Reformed Dogmatics, you see this beautiful kind of expansion of his theological thought, which is pretty wild. Even particularly the theme that Cam just mentioned of from him, through him, to him, that Romans 11:36 theme. You really see that kind of in a nutshell there. And then in Guidebook, it's so clear as it comes out.
That's before I get to my next question, it's what's great about Bavinck. He's not just writing to the academic. He's not just writing to the person who's been a Christian for his whole life, or a girl who's been a Christian for her whole life, who's been in all the theology classes at church and like got a lay degree, whatever it may have been. But he realizes, we can talk to them, but we can also talk to, quote unquote, the lowest common denominator, but not in like different ways. We're not teaching a different faith to one person, or the higher faith to one person. We're gradually leading them towards a full understanding of our triune God. And then it seems like he's really being intentional with this kind of the stairway into let's get more and more into the confessional faith.
I think one of the cool things about Bavinck, Bruce Pass has brought this out in his newest translations of some academic lectures that Bavinck gives, and one of the things that Bavinck does so beautifully, and it's something that I aspire to do, and that every theologian really should, is that he sees theology as the queen of the sciences. It's the discipline that stands above all other sciences and kind of brings unification to them all. But at the same time, he sees it as a servant queen. That in fact, the theology is not meant to just stand over and rule all the sciences, but to serve everything else, and particularly serve the church. And this is oftentimes where theology goes wrong. I mean, this is why we get the language of like the ivory tower theologian. It's this misunderstanding of the purpose of theology, which is not meant to be siloed off in the academy, but to serve the church. And this, and theology is at its best when it's answering the questions that the church has. And I think that this is, like, if I can just be on my hobby horse for a second, I think this is where the academy has gotten it wrong recently, is that it's answering the questions that it finds interesting, and not answering the questions that the church finds interesting. And I think that we end up getting ourselves in a lot of trouble as theologians when that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Probably biographically, it's probably worth noting that Bavinck had a young daughter, Annie. And so kind of thinking through this idea of him, distilling his theology further to make sure that it can be understood by everyone, that's not a question that's distant from his heart, right? His own daughter is, and in the Netherlands at the time, I don't think women were really going to university yet. I think the FU was,
that's right,
correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, one of the first schools to really allow that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also, like, just on a biographical note, this is one of the reasons why our dedication is to, in Greg's case, his nieces and nephews, and young children that he knows, and in my case to my two kids. Like it's a way in which we're trying to say, look, we want to have a vision for what Bavinck had, which is passing on the faith to the next generation.
Yeah, like an homage to what he's done. And I like that. Yeah. That's great. And that segues kind of within these two books. And I know you guys have worked on a couple other things before on Bavinck. And there's been a lot of stuff that's been coming out of Bavinck's pen recently. And this may be a more practical answer than I maybe either I hope or I think it might be. Well, so why these two works right now versus maybe before, or maybe like to translate later? So was it something like practical? Was it something that you guys were, okay, this is why we need these two books translated now versus we could have done it before the Sacrifice of Praise or later on?
I mean, I think if I can be just practical, I think that like Sacrifice of Praise was just an easy entry for both of us in our translation work. But I think for me, and Greg probably feels the same way, we really want to emphasize the pastoral side of Bavinck's work. There's a lot of academic writing that is definitely worth translating, and stuff that's coming out that I think is golden. I mean, Christian Worldview is just superb. I'm glad that it's translated and out. I think Philosophy of Revelation, also really happy that Corey and Gray did that. But my own impression is that I think that it's easy to miss the pastoral side of Bavinck.
Those are really hard works to read too.
Exactly.
Ones you just described.
Yeah.
Like you said, these ones are not hard to read, the ones that are coming out.
Yeah. And I think that that's the beauty of these. I think that for me, Sacrifice of Praise and Guidebook were really the perfect examples of a theologian with brilliance bringing his work to bear in the service of the church. And you could tell that he was brilliant without him feeling the need to, on every page, prove that he's brilliant. And in fact, I think you can tell that he's brilliant even more because he's able to say what he wants to say in a way that everybody can understand him. So I think that for me, it's a prime example of catechetical theology. That is theology that's influenced by and expositing the catechisms of our church in both Sacrifice of Praise and Guidebook. And we kind of see, I mean, if you were to ask me how I see these playing together, I think Sacrifice of Praise and Guidebook, and as well as Magnalia Dei, all kind of function together in that same vein of catechetical theology, and they function to help us introduce people to the faith, as well as confirm people in the faith. And that's why the subtitle for a book like Sacrifice of Praise is Meditations Before and After Partaking in the Lord's Supper.
Yeah, and in the spirit of Bavinck, where he wants to put his works out there where everyone can understand and not get, like what you're saying, in the ivory tower and too heady, and going back to just defining some terms. Both Cameron and you, Gregory, both mentioned his work on Reformed dogmatics. Now, that's something that we hear a lot back and forth, but I think generally speaking in Christianity, or even outside Christianity, they're like, wait, what are you talking about? What is dogmatics? Like, you lost me like 10, 15 minutes ago. What is Reformed dogmatics? And then on top of that, what does Bavinck specifically say about Reformed dogmatics, and how is it applied to Christianity generally today?
Greg?
I thought I lost a connection.
So Reformed dogmatics is one, the name of probably the work that he's best known for. And then secondly, it's an enterprise within the discipline of theology. So in the 19th and 20th century, really both in Germany and the Netherlands, there was something called the Theological Encyclopedia, which sounds really boring. I'll just put that out
Yeah.
because I think when we think of an encyclopedia, we kind of maybe picture the traveling salesman that came to our parents' home when we were a kid. So some sort of like dictionary with extended, references. For them, the encyclopedia was really this exciting like mind map of kind of picturing how do all these different spheres of knowledge kind of relate to one another. So, what does math have to do with law, or what does law have to do with philosophy? But then the particular sciences themselves, so theology would have its own encyclopedia, the Theological Encyclopedia. And so within Bavinck's Theological Encyclopedia, or really theology, and we see this today in really university curriculums, there were kind of 4 spheres of kind of, or avenues of doing work. And so the first one would have been really exegetical theology. So for this one, you're kind of thinking how do you read the Bible? What are the main languages of the Bible? How do you interpret it? Really getting into the text itself and the kind of the minutia. So even the canon would have been a part of exegetical theology. And then kind of flowing out of that would have been systematic or dogmatic theology next to it. And dogmatic theology was a kind of a map itself of how do the various things that Christians believe, how do they really get mapped across all of Scripture and then kind of talk to one another? How are they in harmony with one another? And so under this umbrella of systematic theology or dogmatic theology would have been things like theology, ethics, apologetics, and then the other 2 kind of avenues of this encyclopedia. So we had exegetical and then systematic theology. We also have church history or historical theology and practical theology, or kind of the outlet of the church itself. So in this umbrella of this boring sounding concept is this kind of map, and dogmatic theology is really one avenue of that map. So
yeah, and maybe to add on to that, and I'm going to kind of change one of my questions a little bit, kind of based off that answer, what Nick asked too, because I think some people might be looking at this and wondering, so is he just doing like another abridgment of Dogmatics and just like kind of dumbing it down and like just condensing it and like, oh, this is what this book is, but we're just taking previously known work from Bovink and then condensing it down? Or is this something Bovink actually wrote on the, like, that's not attached to those 2 things, that's its own book within its own? Because I know there's an abridgment of the 4 volumes of Reformed Dogmatics. There's the Wonderful Works of God. So how does this work with all of those things? Is it like, did he mean this is a separate thing completely, that it's not like condensed form where somebody's like, oh, I can look at this and get all this information I need? So does that make sense with what role does this book play in terms of, are we just condensing him, or is this something that's he wrote?
Right. Yeah. So maybe unlike John Calvin, the well-known kind of Genevan Swiss reformer, who kind of spent his life slowly expanding his institutes kind of over and over again. Bavinck kind of went in the opposite direction, where he wrote his Reformed Dogmatics. He then edited over 10 to 12 years, re-put it out there, and then after that, he himself went through the process of really distilling it. There's probably the most word for word overlap between Magnalia Dei and Guidebook. I think about 40% of the paragraphs roughly can kind of be traced to one another. And so, this is his own distillation of his thought. Out of the works that you mentioned, really the Baker abridgment of the Reformed Dogmatics would be the only one that Bavinck didn't have his hand in.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think some people are wondering, like, how does this play into all the stuff that we see from Bavinck? Are they related to each other in some sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Greg is, obviously Greg is right on. Everything Greg says is brilliant. So I usually just nod and smile.
For those who are listening and aren't watching on YouTube, he was drinking some water as he's being asked that question, and it looks like he almost spat it out. So you have to watch on YouTube just to see all this action play out.
I think one of the things, like, to answer the question, I think the answer like is this. I mean, yes, it is in some sense an abridgment of Reformed dogmatics and Magnolia Day, and no, it isn't at the same time. It is he's definitely got other people in mind as he's writing. So is he pulling material from other sources? Yeah, and there's going to be, and if somebody's familiar with with his first work, Reformed Dogmatics, and then familiar with the wonderful works of God, you're going to come to Guidebook, and you're going to go, oh, like, this is really familiar. At the same time, there's enough in it that's unique and different, and he's right. You can tell that he's writing to somebody else, that makes it makes it a unique experience. So I think that it's one of those works that will only help to expand somebody's knowledge of theology, and also provides a really helpful pattern for how we think about how to help somebody that's new to the faith understand the faith.
Yeah, that's helpful, because I think, Reformed Dogmatics, I think if you look at the page count, it's like 3,000 pages. If you look at Wonderful Works of God, it's like 800 pages or something around that. Then you look at Guidebook, and it's 250. So it's, at least just page wise, it's like, oh, I can actually take a bite out of this and not worry about my next year of reading.
Right. Yeah.
I
like to think about kind of Bavinck's trajectory, and Cam's going to get a kick out of this, in light of the musician Tame Impala. Tame Impala's first work was kind of this classic rock. One of the reviewers said it's as if Kevin Parker, this guy, has been stooging around Perth, kind of unaware of the rest of the world. And that's kind of academic theology, right?
Yeah. That's Perth, Australia, by the way.
Right. Just kind of in our own world doing theology. But then over the last really 10 years, Tame Impala has slowly been moving towards kind of pop theology. And he's become, kind of a global figure. And that's really Bavinck, right? He's moved his theology out of Perth and kind of into this wider world and into the wider audience, having really everyone in mind, this kind of pop music in mind.
Yeah, and that actually tees up a good question. This is more based on the What is Christianity book, but not limited to that if you don't want it to be. Knowing that theology generally isn't really a response to culture in a vacuum per se, it's more of a context of the culture that theology is usually responding to from a theologian, right? So Bavinck had a very specific cultural context that he was going through at the time, right? In the Netherlands. And so how is what he's saying in his context on his theology related to your book, What is Christianity?
So there are various kind of features within What is Christianity that one could emphasize. One aspect of it is that he's really presenting Christianity historically. He wants us to connect it to the historic Christ. He wants us to see that in the Gospels we can really trust the narrative that's being presented to us. But then kind of also underlying this is he's wanting to kind of really subvert culture in a way, and us to acknowledge that the various kind of worldviews or philosophies or the visions that we have of kind of how life should be playing out through the other various religions or non-religions really don't satisfy us. And he wants us to kind of come around to acknowledging that only the Christian God offers a kind of a comprehensive way of viewing the world, not only intellectually, but also a comprehensive kind of healing patch for our souls and our hearts, which is kind of the Augustinian thread that really connects both works. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of brings up a question with this. So, I mean, like Nick said, these are both written in context. Like, what, maybe if you don't have to reconstruct the entire kind of cultural context, like what kind of context is Bavinck writing in? And then how do we, with your translation work, how do we take Bavinck's work in Guidebook and What is Christianity, and say, okay, this is who he's talking to then, how do we translate this into today while reading these books?
Yeah, I mean, in a very real sense, I think Bavinck is writing into a culture that is not extremely dissimilar from ours.
Okay.
In that it's a highly secularizing culture, quickly becoming post-Christian, especially with Guidebook. I mean, Guidebook he's writing near the end of his life. The Netherlands is starting to rapidly secularize, and in fact, like trying to figure out, okay, how does Christianity continue to move forward in a culture that no longer acknowledges its Christian roots in any way. And so I think Guidebook functions to help us kind of think through, how do we maintain a robust Christianity in the midst of that, and bear witness to the truth of Christianity to a world that doesn't understand our faith. So I think that I mean, Bavinck this is my PhD is all about this. Bavinck would have a huge issue with us just repristinating or copying his theology and pretending like nothing changed between early 20th century into the 21st century. I mean, we have new issues. I mean, we have to deal with things like social media. We have the civil rights movement, and then asking questions surrounding LGBTQ plus questions in the church and in society, things that Bavinck wouldn't have even imagined as possibilities. We have a lot of questions that we have to deal with that he didn't. But at the same time, we stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before. This is, I mean, the introduction to Magnalia Dei is great in that he says, look, there is the questions that were being asked in the post-Reformation period aren't the questions that are being asked now. And thus, we can't just go back to their old answers. We need to take their answers and expand on them for our generation. And I think that same thing is true here and now. Like the questions that Bavinck is asking, the issues that he's dealing with. I mean, he's dealing with the beginning of secularization. We're dealing in really a secularized and even, I mean, almost, in Australia, a post-Christian society. And so we're asking different questions, while at the same time Bavinck's questions and Bavinck's answers are helpful for us to begin to know how to answer the questions that are being asked now.
Yeah, based on that, doesn't he have like a very strong emphasis and understanding on the doctrine of common grace, kind of loose, based on what you're explaining a little bit there?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe in conjunction with Cam's last statement, culture presents us with all sorts of various questions, and it's always shifting. But really, Bavinck in What is Christianity kind of reminds us that Scripture presents us with really one question, and kind of that propels us forward, right? What do we make of Christ? But yeah, Bavinck had a pretty robust theology of common grace, really. The whole Dutch neo-Calvinism, Reformed theology, that's kind of one of the big things that they provide as a kind of, I guess, a historical system, which really outflows out of their doctrine of providence, meaning that God is still doing good things in the world, that they're the true, the good, and the beautiful wherever it is found. This is common grace.
Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, and we look at all the stuff that he's written, all the stuff that's being translated, we've answered a lot of questions. We've talked about this and a couple other books being an entry board, or like kind of a springboard into a lot of books. So how do people use these two works, What is Christianity and Guidebook, not just understand Bavinck, but how do they use this kind of a springboard into some of Bavinck's thought that you've seen structured in this, but is also a helpful way for people to say, okay, now that I've read this, I can go on to this. How do I best use these two works?
I mean, I would say that if you're looking to just do entry level theology, a good place to start is Guidebook. I think it's a good place to start if you're, I mean, even if you're not going to do more Bavinck study, if you're just saying, hey, I need to I want to read some theology for a class, or I want to read some theology with some people in my church. A great place to start is Guidebook. My hope would be that it would become kind of at the same level as Greg's early academic career in theology and reading Millard Erickson. But something that's not just a grab bag, but is a coherent system. I think that it's on par with something like Michael Horton's Pilgrim Theology.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, it is. We assign it at Christ College.
There you go. I'll let him know he's on campus.
I'm hoping to displace him with Guidebook. How do you get books sold? You assign it in your class. So no, I think that it's my hope is that by translating this, it becomes something that can be a tool inside of our churches. And then if people want to go deeper into like understanding what Bavinck has to say, go and read Wonderful Works of God, or if you want to skip Wonderful Works of God and go straight into the deep end, jump into Reformed Dogmatics and plow your way through 4 volumes of Bavinck. But I think it's like I think Bavinck's Guidebook is just a great spot to start your theological journey. Like if you're a young person who wants to start going deeper than just memorizing the catechism, move into Guidebook, and you'll really be blessed by it.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a super quick plug too. So people who haven't seen the title as they're listening to this, it'll come out in a little bit. But it's the footnotes are linked well, and there's some little pieces within the pages as well that show, okay, if you want to go further in this is where you go, or this is where we got this. So I think it's linked really well to a lot of these other works. So if people want to go further into it after reading some of this, like, okay, I get this, let's go a little bit deeper. Then you guys have made it really easy to go deeper and find out where these things place within Bavinck's thought.
That took a lot of time, so I'm glad
I can't imagine how long that took. But it's really helpful, I think, if somebody's like, how do I get into this stuff? They at least have, okay, here's the jump board. Where do I go from here?
Thanks for
and then
that.
connecting with what is Christianity.
Yeah.
It's really a retelling of Christianity, the history of it, with one focal point, right? What do we make of Christ? And that really defines, I think he says, Christ is Christianity itself. And so if you want to read about Christianity and kind of get a tour de force really quick of the history, how do these various branches, relate to one another in a really ecumenical and friendly tone, this is the book.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, it sounds like these two books are coming out very intentionally together, that they play off each other really well, that they're meant for kind of the same audience, but it's those who have big questions that need simple answers, or I guess concise answers that are easy to read.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, I actually have kind of a random question. That's maybe more so like, I'm sure people who are thinking about this is going to be a very niche audience who cares about this, but a lot of translation work. I'm sure people are wondering, like, how do you do translation work? What goes into this stuff? Like, how long does this take? Like, what's the process like? I'm sure people are like, how do you even get into translation work? Like, what's it like being a translator of Bavinck or somebody else?
A lot of discipline over prolonged periods of time. So at least for my part of these translations, we both kind of go through the whole work and translate it kind of twice, and then we kind of talk about where we disagree or where we think we might be able to change things and make them more uniform. But I typically did just a paragraph a day across like 2 years.
Okay.
So
Wow.
it's just that every day you're just back in the Dutch and looking up words that you don't remember. And James in Edinburgh really, he does a great job at introducing you to Dutch grammar. And then it's really on you to get the vocab down. And then I think both Cameron and I spent a month in the Netherlands, which was pretty helpful for portions of language acquisition, at least pronunciation. But,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think I spend about when I'm doing a translation project, I'll just aim to do an hour a day of translation. For me, it's It's a bit like putting a puzzle together. So I kind of it's a relief in the middle of the day when like my brain is fried from reading and from writing to go and just spend an hour doing something that makes sense, and that there's not a lot of like theoretical like trying to have to. So that's fun. And then
I'm sure a lot of people right now are listening to that like, your break is translating. Are you kidding?
That's awesome.
and then
some people wordle, you know, Cameron's just
that's right.
Yeah, and then at the end of the process, we actually hand it off to we try to hand it off to a native Dutch speaker to try to get their opinion. Did anything we say is anything we say crazy here? And that's helpful. So yeah, we have a few native Dutch speakers that'll read it for us as well.
Yeah, I've always wondered, what kind of goes into this, and also to pump up the book, because I know a lot of authors don't like we can make direct appeals to audience, like buy this book to make it worth 2 years of translation of all this time that goes into it.
Yeah.
This is not an easy thing to do. So yeah, we're thankful for the fruits of your labors to make more of Bavinck available for the common person, really, especially with these two works where they may look at the Reformed Dogmatics like, I'm not even gonna try to touch that stuff. That's too long, that's too heavy, that's too thick. The other one is the Wonderful Works of God is like, that's better, but it's still 800 whatever pages long. That's still really long, but 250 pages, that's normal book size. I think I can do that. Yeah, I don't know, Nick, if you have anything else to add, then we'll kind of close this up.
Random question to close it out. What's your each of you guys can answer. What's your favorite thing about Bavinck? Very easy question. You can't even mess it up. Your favorite thing about Bavinck could be really anything, something really deep with his theology, or something just that you learned about.
You just liked
the
his
background of his life. That just something about his life that was so unique that made him, you know, kind of the struggles he had maybe as a young boy, made him the way he is, or something.
I mean, I could go with the fact that his father gave him cigars for his birthday, but I'll
Sweet. That's a good one.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
wins.
if I'm gonna go to what I love about Bavinck, it's something that I've said a couple times already. Like I just love the fact that he always is doing theology with an eye toward the church. I love the church. I teach my title is lecturer in applied theology and missional engagement. I'm not sure what that means exactly. People ask me, my predecessor said that he taught everything but the Bible. I like to tell people that I teach at the intersection between practical theology and systematic theology, and really am thinking about, okay, how does our theology of the church interact with what we do in the church every day? So I love Bavinck for that. He's constantly thinking about the church and how best to be both a churchman and an academic. And it was a struggle for him to try to figure out. And I think that throughout his life, you see that struggle where he's trying to figure out what is the role of the theologian in the church? Is it am I to be a theologian at a seminary, or am I to be a theologian at the in the academy? And he's constantly, it's a struggle, and I appreciate that, and I've grown to appreciate Bavinck for that.
Similar to that, I really kind of admire Bavinck's personality, or at least as it has come across. That he really desires to not be in the public eye. He doesn't seem like he was interested in brand building. Maybe, you know, Contra Kuiper, who really is
loved his brand.
this
I was actually going to ask that, the difference between them.
Yeah.
Kuiper is really this kind of perfect picture of Charles Taylor, the philosopher's age of mobilization person. So this person that goes out, builds institutions, right? He's got a university, journals. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. But Bavinck was
in one of his in a celebration of his life, I actually put this in an article recently that he there's a comment about Kuiper that that's made that says there's not one page of Dutch history that does not have his name on it.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. That's Kuiper for you.
Yeah.
Well, they're
Or like,
both polymaths, like you're saying.
Yeah.
They're both involved in so many things. It was crazy.
Or like Kuiper made sure that his dying words were known to everyone, whereas Bavinck was kind of telling people, don't report on what I say here. He wanted that moment to be kind of private, I'm assuming. And so I don't know, in this day of kind of marketing and brand building, I really appreciate that he wanted to use his gifts to the fullest extent and really serve the Lord in any capacity that he could. But he really seems to have tried to get his own kind of glory and personality out of the way, and I kind of admire that.
I think Bavinck's one of Bavinck's relatives near the end of his life makes the comment that he just wanted to serve people like that, whereas some people want to rule, Bavinck wants to serve.
Yeah, I think it comes pretty clear, at least through these two particular works and a lot of other stuff. But he's pointing towards the church, and we need a lot more theologians pointing towards the church versus kind of pointing towards each other and say, "Hey, you see what I wrote?" versus giving it to the church. And so, where can people find you? And I know there's some stuff that you guys are working on. So, where can people find you, and kind of what's on the horizon for Bavinck research, Bavinck stuff that we can be looking forward to?
I'm I'm laboring in obscurity in Australia, and happy about that. But we have a small faculty podcast here at Christ College called Down Under Theology, double entendre. We're down under, but we're also trying to get down and under theology. It's really trying to think through how does our theology relate to the life and mission of the church, and with a particular taste of the Australian church. But so that's done by another faculty member, Murray Smith, and I do that. And then I have a book coming out here probably next year with Oxford University Press, something that nobody will buy.
Yep.
Nobody's planning on buying it, but it'll be available. If you want to spend $100 on a book, it'll be the best $100 that you ever spend.
That's high praise. What's it called?
Well, the working title right now is There Is Not Yet a Christian Dogmatics, the influence of the 19th century turn to history on the theological methodology of Herman Bovink.
There you go. So that's
a very Puritan title.
Yeah. that's a puller right there. That's networking and sales. Doing hard work.
It's not going to fit on Twitter. So I think the title just is the 100 and whatever or 200 and whatever characters that Twitter allows.
Yeah. What about you, Greg? Where can people find you, and what are you working on?
As for me, I've kind of got my head down in the sand for a bit as I try to close out the PhD. Thank you for introducing me as Dr. Gregory Parker at the beginning.
That's the first time I've heard that. That's great. That sounds great.
I like that. I'm trying to submit here in the next couple of months.
Nice.
So no big projects on the horizon, but we'd love to give a shout out to a few of our friends working on things. Ray Sutanto and Corey Brock are both working on a handbook on neo-Calvinism. So kind of looking at Bavinck's tradition and kind of those related to Bavinck. It's a bit of a historical work, but it also has a constructive or forward-looking, how does this branch of theology or these group of theologians, how do they impact the way that we could do theology today? And so that should be coming out with T&T Clark in about a year's time, I think. Okay. And then also our advisor, James, along with Corey and Gray, has a translation of Personality and Worldview, which is by Bavinck's nephew, J.H.
Oh, that's
perhaps the superior Bavinck. We'll find out in time. But I know that they're really excited about that. And I think Tim Keller was saying something about he's the C.S. Lewis of the neo-Calvinist tradition or something. So we have something to look forward to.
Nice. Well, thanks for you guys' work on these books.
I actually think that's just James that's translated that.
Is it just James?
Yeah, okay. I think Corey, James, and Gray translated the Christian Science book.
You're right. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
Is that
no, it's good.
Is that coming out through Crossway?
Yeah, both the Christian Science book and the
Okay.
J.H. Bavinck.
That's right. I remember
Through
seeing that
Crossway.
somewhere. Yeah.
They're going to be
Cool.
great. They're great, both great resources, I think. And JH, the cool thing about JH is that he's a missionary, and he's thinking about he's applying Bavinck in a missional context. So like you're kind of asking the question, how do we apply this? Well, JH is a great example of how he starts to think through how to apply his uncle's theology to the life and mission of the church.
Cool. Yeah. Well, before I end this, before we sign out, we've been doing this more often. Just so our audience knows who's not on Twitter, we're giving away basically everything that they've written or that they translated on Bavinck through Hendrickson. We're giving away giving away like 10 things of Bavinck the Tuesday after this comes out. So if you guys go on our Twitter, guiltgracepod, you'll see it's a lot of stuff that we're giving away. So if you want to get a lot of Bavinck all at once, go to our Twitter at guiltgracepod and you can enter in that giveaway. But other than that, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about your work and making this successful for the church. I think we need more high-level theology that's meant for the church, that they can look at and say, okay, this is who God is, this is who Christ is, who they are for me. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you
for having us. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys.